This is a show that couldn't have existed until 4 or 5 years ago because of the visual effects requirements.
Season 2, everything was building towards the Battle of Blackwater, and so all our resources were saved really for that. Season 3, I think it's more evenly spaced, where you have the Plaza of Pride, which is a huge set piece for us, the ice wall climb in episode 6, the fight with the bear in episode 8, Samwell versus the White Walker.
This is the biggest year for visual effects, and the story sort of allows for that, and it gets bigger and bigger in terms of the scope and in terms of the visual effects.
The show keeps expanding and breathing more deeply. It's always fun and exciting to see what else they've created. Because, you know, most of the real work happens when we're not here.
It's been really a year without a break. And it's a lot of work and it's a lot of hours, but, you know, it's the greatest gig around.
The biggest challenge for visual effects for the whole team of Game of Thrones in season 3 was just the size of it.
Every single season, there's a wealth of new challenges. You're never doing the same thing twice. We're perfecting what we've done before, but we're building on that and also always introducing new elements to the story.
First time you've seen a giant, Jon Snow?
Shooting Dany on the ship was really exciting. It was a huge animated world. We had a beautiful ship that Gemma Jackson built for us, and then everything else was up to our visual effects team.
For Dany's boat sequence with the dragons, we sit down and say, okay, what does everybody want for this sequence? Then we go to previs, and we start lining up all of our cameras on the actual boat that we have modeled in the computer to match our set. And then using digital cameras that match our real cameras, sets that match our real sets, we block out all of the action for the whole scene, where the dragons need to fly, how the actors need to react relative to the dragons, what the camera angles and lenses should be. And then from there, we go on set, we mock up everything we did in the computer on set on the actual day with the actors, with the full crew. And then we take all of that, go into post, take our plates, and then match what we planned in the first place with previs.
The dragons now are the size of swans, so they're huge. We get to watch them frolicking, we get to watch them fishing. Dany interacts with the dragons.
It's really hard sometimes to work with an actor who is having to interact with a creature that isn't there. And so we try as much as possible to give them something to play against, to give them something to look at and to touch.
On set, we use a green tennis ball on a stick. It's the standard way of getting eye lines correct and interaction. And I tend to puppeteer that myself because I sort of pre-perform what the dragon's going to do. And also, you have to help the actor feel as if they're interacting with something and they're not sure what it's going to do. So I push against Amelia's hand a little bit, or take it away, or nudge her, or just do little things that I would imagine a dragon would do. And then she interacts with it. And we also have rubber stand-in dragons that are roughly the right size, roughly the right color.
It's strange. I genuinely can't explain it, and it's kind of I'm a little bit odd, I think, in my just connection with them as stuffed and animals for the CGI. The models go away and I still kind of definitely feel their presence, which is quite lovely.
The dragons of season 2 were babies. We put human ages on them, so if the dragons of season 2 were 5 years old, the dragons of season 3 are 16. They're sort of starting to come into their own. They're starting to show off for their mom, and they play, they joust around, they guard. We added some features to the dragons, some fins. They can bulge their eyes out. They can push their teeth out like a shark. The chest inflates. They have a lot of real-world features that they employ if they sense any danger.
What our supervisor Joe Bauer did for season 3 was come up with some ideas based on nature, where you look at an animal and imagine what kind of threatening posture it might have.
We look at Komodo dragons. We look at really every lizard-like reptilian thing on the planet. So everything we do is based on reality.
You look at an animal and imagine what kind of threatening posture it might have. And so you'll see in the dragons for season 3, they have a real developed threat pose. This season we have a manticore, which is sort of a scorpion-like creature that threatens Danny at the dock in Astaport.
This little girl appears who just seems like a little girl playing, and she has a little ball. She rolls it for Daenerys. Daenerys picks it up, and suddenly this cowled figure comes in and knocks the ball out of her hand. You think, what the hell's going on?
When it opens up, this deadly creature shows itself, and so that'll be a completely CG creation, and it was designed mostly by the art department.
So they took my 3D model, sent that, just emailed it to America, and this is called stereolithography, and it cuts out the exact form of our 3D model. So this will be painted up so all parties concerned know what this thing's going to look like.
We used it on set as the eye line and also as lighting reference when we were shooting the practical stuff, and then the vendor built it out, and we did the same photo research that we did with the dragons, looking at beetles, bugs, anything that has sort of an exoskeleton, and settled on a June bug predominantly, because the way the light sheens and the iridescent quality of it, because it's supposed to be from magic, the reason it exists. So it should have a familiar but also an otherworldly quality.
One of the interesting creative challenges of season 3 was to put together what does it look like when a White Walker dies, when Sam stabs the White Walker with dragon glass. And one of the ideas was that he would instantly freeze over, and that frost would travel across the front of his body, emanating from where he gets stabbed, and that would reveal that he is ice. And once he becomes fully frozen, that he would then break up into ice chunks that would drop off him and ultimately turn into frost and dust that would blow away in this gust of wind that would be brought in with him.
Visual effects are very important to Game of Thrones, and visual effects fall into two categories. I think most of the viewers understand the dragons, the direwolves, some of the more spectacular things that we do with visual effects. But also what visual effects does time and time again is to add scope to the show in much more subtle ways.
There's a lot of times where we do have massive sets, but they're not as massive as they look. And a lot of sets after 20 feet or so, they'll end, and then we take over everything from there. We want to show the scope and scale of the show, and we do that with visual effects, and those are the most seamless effects throughout the show.
The creative process of coming up with a castle is to really start with what is the location and what is the feeling we're supposed to get when we see it. Just like we did with Dragonstone, like we did with the Red Keep, like we did with Harrenhal.
The first episode, we meet Robb Stark and Roose Bolton and Robb's entire army coming to Harrenhal. And Harrenhal has a great history. It's really old, as so many things are in Game of Thrones, but it's the only structure that was destroyed by dragons. So we researched volcanic activity and saw how rock melts. And so we made it look as if it was destroyed by dragonfire. And then it's been inhabited a number of times since then, so the walls are being held up. It's sort of makeshift attempts to keep the whole thing from falling apart.
Last season we were quite familiar with Harrenhal, we were introduced to it, so we were trying to maintain that sense of scale that we had and the austerity of Harrenhal, and you know, this is like quite a functional, scary place really, so it's kind of fitting that, you know, we stumble on this massive bear pit.
The bear pit we built after a huge amount of conversation how the hell to do it and where to put it, and we really only had that one courtyard for Harrenhal.
It had to look like it had been there forever, and it had to sort of look like it was made from gnarly wood, and you know, it wasn't polished. From a scenic point of view, that was quite a tricky one, I think, to pull off, because it had to be structurally safe, but at the same time it had to look like it had been there for a long time.
Then of course it had to be built in a fairly regular way, because we're going to have to shoot some of the aspects of that back in Los Angeles with the actual bear.
The actors were not allowed to be in immediate proximity with the bear because that was not really a safe thing to do. So we built a bear pit in Belfast, an identical bear pit here in LA to be able to replicate a lot of the shots and to be able to keep the extras from Belfast in the LA shots. And so it was always going to be a big visual effects scene, but it became even more visual effects intensive.
For the bear pit scene, we used every trick in the book. We used green screen. We shot Jamie and Brienne in front of green screen. We shot the bear in front of green screens.
You also have to take into consideration the requirements of the bear. The set in Belfast is actually an oval set, and it's enclosed on all sides. It's a pit. Well, the bear cannot be confined in a 360, so we can only have half the set in Los Angeles.
Using clever cinema tricks, you can put together a scene with 2 actors and a bear in an environment that's shot in several different places, in several different ways, on several different days.
We're taking it to King's Landing.
For King's Landing this year, it was easy to make it look a little bit different because of the Battle of Blackwater. So we built the same towers, but we damaged them and we charred them, and we're far enough along in the story that they're rebuilding. So we researched medieval building techniques, and there's actually a lot of research and a lot of illustrations about how they would have rebuilt these things. And so digitally we just duplicated that.
The Sept of Baler presented a bunch of different challenges. The design of it was that it be the most colossal cathedral that had ever been built, and we shot it on a fairly small stage. We had to extend it using set extensions, and we did that with green screen, and we allowed the cameras to keep moving so the directors would be able to sweep through it and have a majestic kind of shot. And we tracked those shots and created a background for them that was a CG model that tracked with the cameras and extended the set in every direction.
Before we knew what it was, we only knew that it had to be amazing. We knew it had to be the biggest structure in the show's mythos, at least to this point. And as big a stage space as the show has to build in, we could only afford to build one small pie wedge. There are 7 enormous statues that are much older than the structure itself. So the history is that the statues were carved, a millennia ago, and then moved into this giant structure that was built much later. So it's very much like Egyptian artifacts that you would find in Rome.
It's like taking a walk through history.
And then we get to Astapor and Yunkai, and Astapor and Yunkai are in Slavers Bay. Slavers Bay is seaside, it's rich, they're trading cities, they're port cities, and they had to have a very particular look to them, but at the same time they needed to look like sister cities. And one of the tools we used to tie them together was a bit of the architecture has a similar look to it, but also it has a very iconic harpy that lives in the structure of the city that brings them both together.
Astapor has a gold leaf harpy, and Yunkai has a marble harpy, but they're basically the same shape and size. So Dan and David thought it would be nice to make a shot that lets us know the geography of Yunkai, because as a rule we only are looking up at it, and so a lot of it is hidden behind the big outer gate.
Dario and Jorah are about to go into the city and have their battle. They're outside the gates and they're talking about what they're setting up to do, but we needed a shot that said, here's where they are, here's where they're going, and here's how impressive this city is.
We decided to put big bonfires on either side of the marble harpy on the roof of the pyramids that are the highest points of Yunkai. So the camera flies over that at night. It's all torch lit and moonlit, and you just see this enormous cityscape of adobe buildings.
For Astapor, we'll be using locations in Morocco and enhancing them and creating the city of Astapor where it doesn't now exist.
Well, what's great about Essaouira, where we are now, this is where Astapor is located. So unlike some of the other locations, a lot of what Essaouira is will be what Astapor is. The seawall, which is several hundred years old, which exists here. It looks like an effect when you see it, but it's actually real. So we've designed sort of a new city, a new old city, which we're putting in.
There's a lot of crowds, and as you can imagine, with 8,000 Unsullied following Danny out of Astapor, those crowds will be visual effects enhanced in a big way.
We've got a big set here in Morocco, which is the Plaza of Pride. We have her addressing all the slaves and the whole kind of thing with Grazni and the dragons, and it's got to feel absolutely mammoth, huge, huge, huge.
It looks unlike anything I've ever seen before. It's majestic, and it's just, the scale of it is ridiculous.
Everybody wants to see the dragons do what they can do, and this is, in episode 4 is the first time that Drogon, which is the main dragon, the black dragon, sort of the alpha of the 3, is set loose as a weapon.
What we try to do is be as photorealistic as possible, and that starts with using real photographed elements. So when Krasny gets it, and Drogon is in the corner of the screen and we're kind of over Drogon's shoulders, he's about to blast him. What's really been photographed is a stuntman in a fire retardant suit being blasted by a flamethrower.
To create Dragonfire, you work with somebody like Stuart Brisden, who's our special effects supervisor. And when you mention fire or burning anything to Stuart, he gets a slight little, the teeniest, tiniest little glimmer in his eye, and you know that his brain is going like this.
We've been using the chain for the dragon rig. So the idea is the dragon's on the other end, but obviously we haven't got a dragon, a real one. So we've built a rig that will hold up the chain, and we can move the chain around and shake it around so that it looks like there's a dragon on the end. And we add on to that a fire rig, so we have a flamethrower on the end, basically.
We also shot a bunch of practical fire elements with Stuart with the same rig, and then we comp those in. But we've sort of avoided CG fire because we just don't think it looks quite as good.
We're doing an explosion on top of a wall with Danny standing in front of it, about 40 feet in front of it, so it's very controlled. It's a very safe explosion. And we have 4 explosions that go off in a row, so 1, 2, 3, 4, just to create a massive fireball, just to back Danny, really, to show she's got the power.
And then the other part of what we did was take the 400 costumed extras and turn them into 8,000. We determined that we needed a camera at 200 feet so that we could shoot the big exit shot. So we wanted to be up high enough so that we could see inside the plaza, over the walls. We wanted to see 4 big columns of the Unsullied exiting. We wanted to see all of Astapor. We wanted to see the destruction. We wanted to see the shoreline, the waves crashing. And we wanted to see the dragons enter in the foreground, in the air, flying over. So it's a lot of stuff to cram into one shot. Probably the hardest thing to achieve was climbing the ice wall, because aside from 30 feet of it, it didn't exist. And we had the actors interacting with it nonstop, and it's a long sequence. It's almost 200 shots.
It required more resources than almost anything else, and more planning than almost anything else, and more work after the fact than almost anything else. This is probably the most visual effects intensive scene we've ever had. I think every shot is a visual effects shot.
It really started with previs, where we sat down and tried to figure out if a batch of people are going to start climbing this ice wall like they're climbing a mountain. How do we physically do that in a way that makes sense for production, that tells the story, that communicates the peril that these guys are in?
For the ice wall, you know, it all starts with having the proper set, which is this 32-foot wide, 50-foot tall, massive set that the actors can really climb, stunt guys can really climb. And then visual effects picks up with, you know, there'll be wires that everyone has to have for safety. And we'll take out all of those wires so that way people don't know that they were suspended while they're doing all this. Then for every time we shoot off the set, you know, we extend the ice wall indefinitely into the distance. But what really helps is to have that real wall on set on the day, and then we match to that and just make it larger than you could ever really build.
We've had to build it, which has been huge, and sculpt it, which is essentially polystyrene, and then it gets plastered, then it gets painted, and then it gets covered with wax, and then it gets painted again sometimes, and then more wax, and then we build up the layers. So you get a lovely feeling of the colour, just very sort of, just like in real ice. It isn't, so it's not like slapped on the front. You sort of get it quite sort of ghostly feel to it.
Yeah, the wall climb was amazing. Yeah, I thought they'd build this kind of 10-foot high plastic wall that we'd have to go up and down 20 times to make it look like we were climbing a lot, but actually they built a 50-foot high plaster and polystyrene wall that we could actually dig real ice axes into and dig our crampons into and do, you know, proper climbing. And it always, again, amazes me with this show when you turn up and they've built something that incredible.
The wall was an experience that I don't think I'm ever going to be lucky enough to get again in my life. It was fantastic. The wall it's plastic, but it had like a waxing cover. And so every time that you buried the axe, it made a thud sound as if it was ice. Like, it was incredible. And so yeah, we just kind of climbed. And with the men down at the bottom, they were brilliant. They kind of like helped us with the wiring. So you looked like you were nimble when you were climbing it, when really we weren't at all. And then the wind machine would start blowing and the ice machine would start blowing. And so we would be kind of like 30 feet off the ground. And it's not very high, but kind of like when you're up there and there's only a mat below, you're kind of looking down and you're like, holy crap.
I've been a competing climber when I was like 20 kilos and 20 years ago. So I have the techniques in my blood, but I really had to do a lot of training to get back the strength. And when you're doing takes after takes after takes, you have to really keep your muscles warm.
It was grueling, it was really hard work. It was like physical and with the wind and the snow machine in your face. And yeah, that was done over, 6 days, I think.
Got them loose!
Rowan Tormund decided they're going to cut Egret and John away, so we devised a system dropping the stunt doubles and catching them from below. When we did the actual drop, they actually caught on secondary lines, so they never actually hit the ground.
When you're in a visual effects review where you're toggling between where you're at with the final shot and what the original plate looked like, what the original footage looked like, it's really satisfying to realize just how far it's come from a bunch of people climbing against a green screen on a white textured wall.
I think one of my favorite visual effects shots of season 3 is when they're on top of the wall at the end of episode 6.
By the time they get to the top of the wall, the sun comes out. The director of photography, David Katz-Nelson, lit them with sort of this gorgeous kind of a peach-colored light. And the set was a certain size for the top of the wall, but obviously it needed to go on for miles. So that was all a green screen stage shoot. And we extended it set off into infinity, really.
And we get that look just straight down the wall, and we see the depth of it and the vastness of it. It's quite a beautiful moment. The final shot of season 3 is Danny is embraced by the now freed slaves of Yunkai.
The final shot needs to not only end the episode, but end the series for this season. So Dan and David felt that this sort of needed to encapsulate everything that Danny has achieved up to this point.
We usually start every season kind of knowing where does each character end their journey for this coming season, and we always felt this is where Danny ends her journey, and it's such a powerful image that it felt like this was the appropriate image to end the season on.
We start on Danny, the dragon flies past her and out of the shot, and then the camera cranes up, and it just keeps going up, and you see, all of the Yunkai slaves, a huge mass of thousands.
We shot a lot of different elements of the crowd of thousands of people around her from a very high construction crane shooting straight down, so that we have these tiles or sections of crowd from very high up and shrunk down so that we can put them and paste them all around her.
I feel like the idea was to really give us a sense of the scale, the size of the stage that she's playing on, just how many people were counting on her, and then for keeping the dragons in play because they're always such an important part of her identity, and we just wanted to tie all of that together in one great shot.
We see the 8,000 Unsullied all in their formation, and we see Yunkai looking down from above. We see more slaves pouring out, and then ultimately Drogon re-enters the shot, flies up and right past camera, and we cut to black.
I think the expectations are very high for season 3. I think we fulfilled them. I think one of the reasons we've been able to attract all of our department heads and most of our crew time and time again is because of the new challenges.
Watching it actually unfold on screen and seeing these sequences ended up being even better than I had it in my imagination. So it was one of the really most fulfilling moments working on this show.
The production schedule was really challenging and very demanding, but everybody just brings their heart to it. It's a labor of love.
It's all fun. Everyone loves it. Everyone watches it. For somebody who does what I do, it's a feast, you know. And everybody who's involved in it is excited to be involved in it.
The show wouldn't exist without these guys, and we're lucky to have them.